Hey guys, Jacob Wimpsit here. I am putting together a new video series, and this is the first video of many that's going to cover a new home design. Now, in the previous home, we did the yard house, and the yard house has actually been in the works for about 3 years now. This project that we're about to go over today is brand new. So we just signed a contract on this last month, and we've been over the past few weeks doing the schematic design or starting the schematic design process of it. As it stands today, I am in the schematic design draft phase of the project. So there are several phases to go and several sub phases to go. But this is an introduction to that home. Now, I don't have a fancy name for it yet, but it is a home that's inspired by the wooded area that it's going to be setting in. So from an aesthetic standpoint, it's going to be a little bit different than the art house because of that context. So like we've talked about in previous videos, many high-end homes, high-end architecture is going to have a lot of contextual inspiration. It's no different with this house. So for now, I'm just going to share with you some of what I've been working on for the past couple weeks. So with that said, welcome to the studio. Let's jump into it. If you're interested in architecture or understanding the process of design and construction for your own project, my team is putting together what we're calling the Project Starter Kit. This is a series of documents that's going to help you through your next project. So if you're interested in that, sign up for our newsletter on our website, and we will send you over the course of a few days a series of documents that'll help you through your next project. Okay, before we get started, let me just give you a little bit of an overview of the general process. So in today's video, we're just going to be covering the schematic design draft portion of it. If you're not familiar with the process, there is a pre-design that we've already gone through, a schematic design, a design development, construction documents, and construction administration. Generally, the way that it's organized is that schematic design is the overall kind of look and aesthetic of the building, and it's also talking about like the function and the program. So it's really just the overall design. And then the later phases are more about identifying what the engineering and what it's going to take to actually build the project. And then the construction documents phase is just about communicating and putting together sets of drawings that communicate the design and those decisions to the contractor. So for this video, we're in schematic design, which is just after pre-design and before we start figuring out how we're going to build it. So this is kind of the prototype portion of the design process. And it's really about exploring what opportunities and what things that we can create that meet the needs of the client in order to then, once the client's satisfied with those things, then go and try to add pragmatism to it in order to create something that actually works. So this is more like the ideas stage, and hence schematic design. So in this, we tend to, or my firm tends to separate each phase into a draft and a final. So we have a schematic design draft and a schematic design final. And what separates the two is just a critique with the client. So right now, we haven't gotten our critique from our client, so it's important to note that this design could change quite drastically after we actually meet with a client. And that's really the intent of the schematic design process. It's meant to be very flexible and fluid, and then as we progress into the later phases of design, it starts to get more solidified and more difficult to make changes. For this video, we're not only focused on schematic design, but we're focused on schematic design draft and some of the things that I've been thinking about when I'm going through and I'm putting the project together. So I'm just going to give you a quick tour of the home of the schematic design draft. Essentially, the way the building is organized is you have this overall large volume that is the main house, and the main house houses the primary program pieces of the project. So the living, dining, kitchen, a lot of the bedrooms are in these locations. You've got the parlor, you've got some of the support spaces. So the majority of the house, the majority of the program is located in that large volume. And that large volume can be represented or could be thought of as the big house, the big part of the house. And then you'll notice that there is this low-lying one-story element that is creating a transition from the big house or the big portion of the house to the pool area. So indoor, outdoor living is always important, especially when it comes to high-end homes, especially when it comes to folks that are looking to design something really unique for them and for the context, for the land that they've spent, so much money on. Having that indoor, outdoor living is really important, and almost every project I do, it's, that is a part of the equation, and it's no different here. So the difference here is that we're creating this transition, this porch, this connector, this flat roof, lower element that's very horizontal and very connected to the land from a geometry standpoint. And it is making this transition from the big house, the main primary living space, to the pool area. And we're using the shape of it to separate different areas of the rest of the context. So the way you enter the property, the way you enter this home is you actually enter from this direction down here. So this element is actually blocking or creating privacy from that entry point and the pool area. Some other things to take note of when it comes to this L shape that is connecting it to the pool is that the primary bedroom suite is located in that portion, and then you have this break where there's the outdoor living dining kitchen that creates that transition from indoor living dining kitchen to the pool, and then we have a guest house. Now, one of my favorite things about this particular design is that the entry is actually outdoors. You actually you're still outside when you walk through this entry gate, and it brings you directly into what I would consider as the primary space, which is the exterior living dining kitchen. And what that entry is separating is the house from the guest house. So the guest house is actually integrated into the architecture, but still separated from a program and from a layout standpoint, and that's what that entry is doing. So my team has put together what we're calling the Project Starter Kit. This is a basic series of information and documents that should help you in a very general way through your next project. So if you're thinking about building a home, go and check that out, sign up for our newsletter, and we'll send you a series of emails with those documents included. Hope to see you there. All right, so like I said, to get to that point of the schematic design, even the schematic design draft takes a lot of time, takes several hours. I had a few weeks into that model, into that design that you just saw. Let's go back in time and I'll walk you through some of the even earlier phases of the process. In the first phase, after pre-design, we've come out of pre-design and we've done some basic diagramming of the layout. And the first step in the schematic design draft is to just continue that diagramming process and start to solve the problems and start to create better relationships between the spaces. So what you're looking at here is a model of just that. It's just a continuation of that diagramming process from the pre-design. And you can already start to tell that this is starting to resemble the end result with a few major differences, of course. One of the big challenges I was running into on this design was the hillside. And the hillside, because the garage and because the pool want to have a direct relationship with the ground, and that's just thinking through just naturally how you're going to build those things. The pool is, of course, you're just digging a hole in the ground. So you need to have that nice connection to the ground, that relationship to the ground to create the pool. You can, of course, elevate the pool, but at least this early in the design phase, I want to try to keep things very simple. So I want to create this relationship with the pool. And then the garage, which is not shown in this particular diagram because it hasn't been solved yet at this point. But the garage wants to have that relationship with the ground as well. And we've got this hill to contend with. So one of the major issues that I was running into in the diagramming is I wanted a lot of these different spaces to have this direct connection to that pool area. And that's the whole reason why we started to go towards this courtyard configuration. So as you can see in the diagram, I've got the basement level at this point, because of that hillside, has a direct relationship with the pool. And in the basement, I'm putting in like the game room and the parlor and some of these actually secondary spaces, which was a problem for me. I wanted to see the living, dining, kitchen and some of those major spaces actually take this position because I wanted those things to have that relationship with the pool. I'm also placing bedrooms and things to have that relationship with the pool. And then as you can see, I misspoke, the garage is in here, but the garage is in this really awkward position where it starts to have this connection to the pool, but it's a garage. Why would you want to have a garage have a relationship with this pool area? So those are the big issues that I was running into at the very beginning that through time I was able to resolve, of course. If I go up to the second level, you can start to see that I placed a living, dining, kitchen on the second level, and the main reason for this is because the owner wanted to have this nice view of not only the pool area, but there is a grove of trees over here where this other piece of geometry is for the model. Let me move that out of the way. But there's a grove of trees up here in this location that he wanted to look out on. So that creates a contradiction and an issue in the plan because of this elevation change. You have a basement condition that's happening down here that clearly cannot have a view of that grove of trees because of the ground surface. And then, of course, you have a disconnect between the living, dining, kitchen because it's elevated. It's elevated to the second level and has disconnected from the pool. So right off the bat, this series of diagrams that I was exploring just did not work. So it's important to know that, like we've said in previous videos, we want to start broad and work our way into detail. We don't want to figure out the thicknesses, even the thicknesses of walls and things like that, until we've got the right relationships between the spaces. So between the iteration 1 and iteration probably 10, I was going through a lot of different series of diagrams to try to solve that issue. Okay, so I'm pulling up another iteration here. This is iteration 4, just to show you some of the progression. I still have this issue that I talked about a while ago where we've got these secondary spaces having a relationship with the pool, but in this iteration I'm playing around with the entry condition, and it looks like I've rotated the primary bedroom and trying to figure out if we can create a stronger relationship with the master suite and the pool area by rotating it. And then I've been playing around with the garage being up on the second level. We still, again, have this basement condition that is creating a lot of issues in the diagram. But you can start to see that we are transitioning towards that schematic design draft. I, of course, at this stage don't know what the schematic design draft is going to be, so I am just playing around and exploring these different options. Now, sometimes what happens is you get in this kind of hole, this writer's block, if you will. And it happens to me all the time. And the way I try to solve that is I jump back and forth into different mediums. So this is, of course, SketchUp. It is a intuitive piece of software that allows me to just rough out things very quickly. But I also use hand sketching and VR and all sorts of other tools in order to get those ideas out and try to get over those hurdles of writer's block. One thing I want you to notice is that scale is always a really important factor when it comes to laying out the house. And you probably noticed that I've already got furniture placed in the diagrams. Now, my interior design friends are really going to love this because they see all the time folks designing homes without an interior furniture plan that just, when they start to put furniture in it, it doesn't work. For me, It is the essence of the space. The furniture itself starts to identify the scale of the space and also how the space is actually going to function. So I put the furniture in before I even put the walls up. So that's just an important tip that if you're designing your home or you're working with another design professional, just make sure that they're putting that furniture and laying that space out, because you can have spaces that are just too large and have empty corners and things in it that just is awkward when you build it. And you can also have spaces, of course, that are too small. So furniture starts to give scale and starts to give that a purpose, a function. So the next major step when it comes to putting together a schematic design draft is massing. So massing is just the general shape of the building. And then I'm also using materials, and when I say materials, I really just mean the contrast between certain volumes. So I'm using like grays and blacks and whites to start to identify and create three-dimension to those series of shapes. So as for example, you can see here that this large house volume that we talked about in the finished schematic design draft, it's standing out because it has a slight contrast, this gray versus black, with these other elements. So it's pretty messy. I'm getting in here and I'm just playing around with the different shapes that we could come up with. Now, one of the things that starts to happen when you start to put massing and layout together is they start to fight each other. What I mean by that is that you're trying to find a shape and a scale and something that looks great from a massing standpoint, but it may not work with the layout. It may not work with the space arrangement that you've come up with. So there's this extreme back and forth between the layout and the look, or the layout and the massing, that needs to take place. And it really is this extreme back and forth. And that's what a lot of these iterations were. So, iteration 5, 6, 7, 8, and probably even 9 were just this back and forth between massing and layout, massing and layout. Now, one of the things that we want to do, we not only want to look at look and scale, but we also want to look at the concept. We want to have some sort of reason or some sort of underlying idea that connects the program and the site to create a piece of architecture that is of a certain caliber. So thinking about these diagrams from a conceptual point of view and creating these transitions and volumes that start to connect indoor and outdoor space, all of that is justification for the shapes and the things that we will eventually come up with in the architecture. So I'm just going to go over to iteration 9, and you can start to see that we have gotten something that is much closer to that end result. We're starting to see these elements come into place: the big house, the primary suite element. You've got the garage in the back. We've already got our entry condition in here. So this is getting really close to what our end result was. What you don't see here is a refined concept. Like I was talking about a while ago, you need something that really connects and gives reason to the shape. So right now we don't have that particular reason. And what I mean by the concept is, if you remember when we were doing the tour of the schematic design draft, we had this large house volume and then this other L shape that was this lower element that connected the big house to the pool. And in this massing model, even though we're really close to what we ended up with, it wasn't until I came up with this idea of transitioning from big house to the pool that really started to unify the design and add reason to the shapes. And it actually started to make the program work and the layout work even better, because I had, in this particular mass, I had way too much program above that primary bedroom that wasn't really working. The house was just too big. It wasn't meeting the client's program. So once I came up with that idea, that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of creating something that worked from both a massing standpoint and a layout standpoint, a program standpoint, a site standpoint, and a concept standpoint. Now, the next step in the schematic design draft process is to understand the scale even more than I already have. So, like I said before, we were putting in furniture and trying to make sure that the space from a scale standpoint made sense for the function that we were putting in place, but it doesn't give us a true sense or a true essence of how big that space is. This client had some very specific imagery that had a lot of scale to it. So, what I mean by that is he was showing me imagery that had tall ceilings, lots of open area, lots of niches and sitting areas that just make the space much bigger than what we typically do on a home. So, I had to get into the VR to make sure that the space felt like it did in the imagery. Without the VR, you really can't get a sense of that. So, getting in the VR and walking through the space with the massing model, with the layout, with the furniture was really important to understand whether this design was actually going to meet the client's needs and the client's precedent images. So the next step for me is to go ahead and start to do a little bit more detailing. Now, it's important to know that we don't want to take this too far because we haven't gotten that critique from the client yet. I think it's important, though, to do some level of presentation, some better level of presentation than just the planes and diagrammatic modeling. Even though the diagrammatic modeling represents the majority of the schematic design draft thinking, I think it's important to go ahead and give the client a little bit better visual to understand the design more. So I do think that I didn't have to go as far as I did as what you're seeing in the tour. I think I probably went a little bit too detailed when it comes to a schematic design draft. This model is probably teetering on the schematic design final level presentation. But nevertheless, I think it's important to just go ahead and have a better representation of the design. Now, one thing that I definitely don't typically do when it comes to schematic design draft is the rendering process. But I like this design. I want to promote this design here on YouTube and in other ways. So I'm going to go ahead and you're seeing here in the time lapse, I'm putting together a rendering model so I can do that. Now, again, schematic design draft is just that. It is a draft, and I can guarantee you this will change quite a bit after my meeting with the client, just because he hasn't had a chance to look at it yet. And what I like to do is create a collaborative environment with my clients to bring them in on the design process and allow that critique to evolve into just a better design overall. So I haven't done that yet. It will change, I promise. But what you're seeing here is just me putting together some presentation images for promoting the design, but also allowing the client or giving the client something a little bit better to look at. My team has put together what we're calling the Project Starter Kit. This is a basic series of information and documents that should help you in a very general way through your next project. So if you're thinking about building a home, go and check that out, sign up for our newsletter, and we'll send you a series of emails with those documents included. Hope to see you there. Okay, so that's pretty much it when it comes to schematic design draft. I hope that this gave you a little bit of insight into what happens behind the scenes. If you've got any questions or have any specific things that you'd like to add, please leave a comment. Also, like, subscribe, all that stuff. I will be, of course, putting together future videos. Schematic Design Final is probably going to be the next one. Just got to get, of course, through that process before I can actually create a video on it. But anyway, again, if you have any questions, please leave a comment. Happy to answer those. And I hope to see you in the next video. Have a great day.